The late afternoon light bathed the room in a warm, almost nostalgic glow, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floor. Detective Laura Hayes stood frozen by the coffee table, her heart pounding as she examined the empty teacup. She had expected to find it, but the chill that ran through her body made it feel like the discovery of a lifetime. Her best friend Charlotte had died just hours earlier, her body found lifeless on the floor, surrounded by the scent of tea that no longer seemed to comfort her. The coroner's report confirmed the truth. Charlotte had been poisoned. But who would do such a thing? She was loved by everyone, except perhaps the person who had the most to gain. Lara's eyes narrowed as she looked closer at the teacup. A faint residue clung to the porcelain. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but enough to send a shiver down her spine. She had to act quickly. If she was going to solve this, every moment counted. As she held the cup, the weight of the case pressed down on her. Was this murder premeditated, or had something gone horribly wrong? The truth was hidden within this room, and Lara was determined to unearth it. Lara's mind raced as she stood by the coffee table, the teacup still in her hand. The faint residue could only mean one thing: poison. But who would have had the access? Who would want to harm Charlotte? She had to investigate every angle. Charlotte had been more than a friend. She had been like family. She could still remember the day they met, fresh out of the academy, both of them eager to prove themselves in the department. But as Lara's thoughts wandered to those carefree days, a sense of foreboding crept in. The case wasn't as simple as she had hoped. The toxicology report had been clear. Poison, a rare substance that would have been nearly impossible to trace if not for the cup's residue. Lara's mind shifted to one suspect: Eleanor, Charlotte's sister. There had always been tension between them, but Lara couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor was hiding something. The pieces were starting to come together, but the bigger question loomed. What had happened that night? Lara made her way to Eleanor's house. The tension in the air was thick, as if the walls themselves knew the truth. Eleanor answered the door, her eyes red, but the slight shift in her posture told Lara everything. There was something off. "Detective," Eleanor murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "Is it true? Is Charlotte really gone?" The words barely left her lips before she stepped aside, allowing Lara in. The house was still, except for the photographs, dozens of pictures of Charlotte and Eleanor together, smiling. But it wasn't the smiles that caught Lara's attention. It was the way Eleanor had placed herself so perfectly into the scene. It seemed rehearsed. Lara knew that look all too well. "I found her," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling. "But I didn't know what happened, I swear." Lara studied her, the words feeling rehearsed, and yet Eleanor seemed genuinely distraught. Was she grieving, or was there more to this story than she was letting on? Inside the house, the atmosphere felt suffocating. Lara followed Eleanor through a hallway adorned with more photographs. Images of a happier time. The walls, though warm with memories, seemed to press in around them. The tension between the two women grew heavier with each step. As Eleanor led Lara into the living room, the detective's eyes scanned the room, taking in every detail. The cluttered coffee table, the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air, everything was in place, too perfect. It was almost as if Eleanor was trying too hard to appear normal, to seem untouched by tragedy. They both sat across from each other, the silence stretching out between them. Finally, Lara broke the quiet, her voice steady but firm. "Tell me about the last time you saw Charlotte. What happened that night?" Eleanor's lips trembled as she began to recount the evening. But the way she spoke, her pauses, her hesitant words, felt rehearsed. Lara's gut told her that Eleanor was hiding something. The question wasn't if Eleanor was guilty, but what her involvement in this truly was. The deeper Lara dug, the more convoluted the answers became. But one thing was clear: someone had lied, and someone would pay for it. As the conversation continued, Lara could feel the weight of Eleanor's words hanging in the air, each one more contradictory than the last. "We were close," Eleanor whispered. "Charlotte and I. We always were." But the detective's mind raced with the inconsistencies. There were too many unanswered questions. Why had Eleanor been the one to discover Charlotte's body? Why had she been so quick to call the police, without any sign of panic? Something wasn't adding up. What happened that night, Eleanor? Lara pressed, her voice now edged with a sharpness that cut through the fragile tension between them. Eleanor's eyes darted around the room, her gaze avoiding Lara's. The detective noticed the tremor in her hands as they rested on her lap. Confession wasn't coming, but the guilt was palpable. Lara knew that Eleanor had a role in Charlotte's death, but the true nature of her involvement remained obscured. As Lara stood up to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor was not just a witness, but a player in a far more intricate game of deceit. Every move from this point forward had to be calculated, and Eleanor's role was far from clear. The investigation was beginning to feel like a maze, with every turn leading to another dead end. Detective Lara Hayes sat at her desk, staring at the pile of reports in front of her. Eleanor's story still didn't sit right, but it wasn't just her behavior that unsettled Lara. Charlotte's family had been hiding something, and the deeper Lara dug, the more questions piled up. She re-examined the evidence, including the strange residue on the teacup. No one seemed to have the answer, but the fact that Charlotte's own sister seemed so composed was too suspicious to ignore. Lara had been a detective long enough to know that guilt often revealed itself in small ways: tics, hesitation, and contradictions. Eleanor had said she found Charlotte's body, but she had never mentioned whether she checked for signs of a struggle or called for help immediately. The lack of urgency had been the first clue. Lara's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of her investigation. One thing was certain: someone was hiding the truth. The only question left was, who was it, and why? Lara knew she had to follow up on the latest lead, the private investigator's findings about the poison used to kill Charlotte. It was rare, almost impossible to trace, and only a few people could access it. This wasn't a random act of violence. Someone with a specific agenda had orchestrated it. But who had the motive? Lara sat across from the private investigator, Marcus Clark, who had uncovered information about a company Charlotte had been working with in the months leading up to her death. The company, a small pharmaceutical firm, had been developing an experimental drug, and Charlotte's name had come up more than once in internal reports. Lara felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Was this a case of corporate sabotage, or was Charlotte's death part of something far larger? Marcus handed her a folder with all the relevant information, and as Lara flipped through it, a name stood out: Julian Barron, the CEO of the pharmaceutical company. Lara's eyes narrowed. Barron was known for his ruthless business tactics. Could he have had Charlotte killed to protect a secret? The pieces were slowly falling into place, but Lara knew that each piece was only a part of a much bigger puzzle. Lara drove to the pharmaceutical company's headquarters, a sleek modern building that seemed to shimmer in the bright daylight. She had no appointment, but she needed answers, and she wasn't leaving without them. As she entered the building, she felt the eyes of the security personnel on her. The receptionist smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Lara had been around long enough to recognize a forced smile when she saw one. "I need to speak to Julian Barron," she said firmly, her badge visible. The receptionist hesitated, but then nodded, leading her through the glass-walled corridors into the heart of the company. The air was thick with the scent of polished marble and expensive perfume, a sharp contrast to the storm of suspicion brewing in Lara's mind. Barron was a tall man, well-groomed, with an air of quiet confidence. When he greeted her, his handshake was firm, but his eyes, cold and calculating, spoke volumes. Lara wasted no time. "What do you know about Charlotte Darnell?" she asked, watching him closely. His reaction was swift, but his smile didn't falter. "I know she was a talented scientist," Barron replied smoothly, "but I have no idea why you'd be here asking about her." Lara pressed on, knowing that Barron was hiding something. The walls around him seemed to close in, and she felt the weight of every word she spoke. Barron's office was just as immaculate as the rest of the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, and the minimalist design reflected his power and wealth. He invited Lara to sit, but she remained standing. "I don't have much time, Mr. Barron," she said, her tone icy. I need you to explain your connection to Charlotte Darnell. Barron's eyes remained steady, though Laura noticed the slightest tightening of his jaw. She was a former employee, he replied, his voice smooth, betraying no emotion. But Lara wasn't buying it. She leaned forward, fixing him with a piercing stare. You expect me to believe that? Your company was developing an experimental drug, and Charlotte had access to sensitive information. Now she's dead. Barron didn't flinch. I don't see the connection, he said, though his eyes flickered momentarily. Lara could sense his unease. She wasn't about to let him off the hook so easily. Someone poisoned her, she said, her voice low. And you know more than you're letting on. I'll find out what really happened, Barron. Mark my words. The CEO's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before he regained his composure. But Lara knew she was on the right track. The truth was closer than ever. As Lara left Barron's office, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something critical. His calm demeanor, though reassuring at first, now felt like a mask to hide his true intentions. She had made progress, but the shadows around Barron's involvement were thickening. Back at the station, she pored over the documents again, this time focusing on the financial records of Barron's company. There it was, an irregular payment. It was small, almost insignificant at first glance, but Lara's instinct screamed that it was tied to Charlotte's death. The payment had been made just days before Charlotte's disappearance, to a name that didn't match any of the company's registered employees. Lara's mind raced. This wasn't just corporate espionage, it was something far more personal. Someone had silenced Charlotte to protect a secret, and the longer Lara searched, the clearer it became. This was no ordinary case. It was a conspiracy, and Lara had just scratched the surface. Detective Lara Hayes sat in her car, staring at the pharmaceutical company's headquarters from across the street. The sun had long disappeared, leaving the skyline bathed in cold, artificial light. Barron's office had felt like a game of cat and mouse, his smooth demeanor hiding something darker. But now Lara was more certain than ever that Julian Barron had a much bigger stake in Charlotte's death than she had first imagined. Her mind replayed every moment of the interview, and it became clear that Barron's calm was a facade. Behind those perfect words was a man who would do anything to protect his empire. And Charlotte had been in the way. Lara's thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. It was Marcus Clark, the private investigator. I've got something, Marcus said, his voice tense. Barron's connection to the payment you found? It's deeper than we thought. There's a hidden ledger, and it leads to someone else, someone high up. You need to see this. Lara's pulse quickened. She knew this was the breakthrough she had been waiting for. As she pulled away from the curb, she steeled herself for what she might uncover next. The web was getting tangled, and the deeper she went, the more dangerous things became. Lara met Marcus at a quiet cafe, away from the prying eyes of the city. He slid the ledger across the table, the paper rough beneath Lara's fingers. It was all there, payments, invoices, and names that should never have been linked to Barron's company. But what caught her attention was the name of a former employee, Eleanor. Her heart skipped a beat. Eleanor was involved. But how? Lara scanned the records again, her mind racing. Eleanor's payments were linked to a secretive offshore account, one that tied back to Barron's company. It wasn't just corporate greed at play, this was personal. Someone had orchestrated Charlotte's murder to silence her, and Eleanor had been complicit. Lara's gut twisted. The more she uncovered, the more she realized the woman she had trusted, the woman who had grieved beside her, was hiding a devastating truth. She had been playing a dangerous game all along, and now Lara had to confront her. There was no more time to waste. The next step was clear. The confrontation would come soon. Lara arrived at Eleanor's house, the door slightly ajar as though it had been waiting for her. Her heart beat louder now, each step toward the front door heavier than the last. She had confronted Barron, and now it was time to confront Eleanor. The evidence was damning, and Lara wasn't sure what she would find when she stepped inside. As she entered the house, the air felt thick, as if the walls themselves knew what was about to unfold. Eleanor was waiting, her face pale, eyes red from crying. But there was something else in her gaze. Something cold. "What's going on, Lara?" Eleanor asked, her voice trembling. But it didn't reach her eyes. "You were never supposed to find out," Lara replied, her voice hard and resolute. "You and Baron were working together, weren't you?" Eleanor's face faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered, looking away. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt." Lara took a step forward. "Then why did you help him?" she demanded. "Why did you betray Charlotte?" The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor's confession hit Lara like a punch to the gut. She had been a pawn in Baron's game, forced into complicity by a mix of fear and ambition. Baron had threatened to ruin her life, and Eleanor had been too weak to resist. "I was desperate," Eleanor admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "He promised me everything, money, security. I didn't think it would go this far. I thought I could stop him before it was too late." Lara's heart ached, but she couldn't afford to feel sympathy for Eleanor. The damage was done. Charlotte was dead, and no amount of remorse could bring her back. "You poisoned her," Lara said coldly, her words hanging in the air like a death sentence. Eleanor flinched, but she didn't deny it. "I didn't want to, but I had no choice," she said, tears streaming down her face. Lara felt a pang of sorrow, but the truth was clear. The betrayal ran deep. Eleanor had made her choice, and now there would be consequences. "You'll have to answer for what you've done," Lara said firmly, as she pulled out her handcuffs. As the police arrived to take Eleanor away, Lara stood in the front yard, her mind spinning with the events of the past few days. The truth was out, but the victory felt hollow. Charlotte was gone and nothing could change that. The case wasn't over though. Baron was still out there, pulling strings, and the evidence had only just begun to surface. Lara's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she quickly answered. It was Marcus. "Lara, I think I've found something bigger," he said urgently. "There's more to Baron's operation than we ever imagined. He's not just in pharmaceuticals. He's connected to something dangerous." Lara's stomach dropped. The investigation had just opened up a whole new set of questions. "We're not done yet," she said, looking back at the house. "We've only just begun." Detective Lara Hayes paced back and forth in her office, the walls closing in around her. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit, but they formed a picture darker than she had anticipated. Eleanor had confessed, but the answers still felt incomplete. She could still feel the weight of the betrayal in her bones. The woman who had once cried beside her was now a key player in Charlotte's murder. And now, Baron's empire was slowly beginning to crumble. As Lara stared at the files spread out on her desk, the realization hit her. This was bigger than just Baron. He had connections in high places, a network that stretched far beyond the pharmaceutical world. There were politicians, businessmen, and people who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. Baron wasn't just a CEO. He was part of something far more insidious. Lara knew that bringing him down would be a battle. But she wasn't backing down. Charlotte's death, though tragic, had uncovered something that had been festering for far too long. She would make sure Baron and his network didn't get away with murder. The call came in the middle of the night. It was Marcus. "Lara, you need to see this." His voice was urgent, edged with fear. "I've got more on Baron's financials, and this time I think we've found the smoking gun." Lara's pulse quickened as she grabbed her coat and headed out the door. She met Marcus at a warehouse on the edge of town, an inconspicuous location where he had been tracking Baron's illicit dealings. The warehouse smelled of oil and dust, the dim lighting casting long shadows on the walls. Marcus handed her a thick folder, his hands trembling. "It's all here," he said, "Baron's secret investments, his offshore accounts, and a deal he made with a weapons manufacturer. This is more than just corporate espionage. He's involved in illegal arms deals, Lara." Lara took the folder, her heart sinking. She had known Baron's reach extended far, but this was beyond what she had imagined. The stakes had just escalated. If Baron was involved in arms deals, Charlotte's murder was just the tip of the iceberg. Lara knew she had to act fast before Baron disappeared, or worse, took someone else out of the picture. The game had changed. Back at her office, Lara pored over the new evidence. The documents revealed everything: offshore accounts, bribes, illegal arms contracts, and ties to international criminal organizations. Baron wasn't just a businessman. He was a kingpin, pulling the strings behind the scenes of a much larger operation. Lara leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She could almost feel Baron's presence looming over her. He had to be stopped, but the more she uncovered, the more she realized that taking him down would not be as simple as she had hoped. This was no longer just a murder investigation. It was a fight against a powerful network of corruption. The deeper she dug, the more she realized that Baron's influence stretched all the way to the top, and taking him down would require more than just proof. It would require allies. But the question was, who could Lara trust in this dangerous game? Everyone had their own motives, and in a world this corrupt it was hard to know who was on her side. Lara arranged a secret meeting with a former colleague, Detective Tom Ward, who had worked deep undercover within corrupt organizations. Tom was one of the few people Lara trusted implicitly, someone who understood the stakes. Baron's not just a businessman, Lara said, her voice low. He's a player in a much larger game. He's connected to arms dealers, international cartels, and corrupt politicians. This is bigger than we ever thought. Tom leaned in, his expression grave. So, what's the next move? He asked. We need to get Baron's network piece by piece, Lara replied. But we need help. I can't do this alone, not anymore. It's too dangerous. Tom nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. I'll help you. But we're going to need more than just evidence. We need to go public with this. Expose Baron for what he really is. Lara nodded, knowing he was right. The time for secrecy was over. The truth had to come out, even if it meant risking everything. Let's bring him down, Lara said, determination flashing in her eyes. With Tom's help, Lara initiated a covert operation to expose Baron's criminal network. They began gathering intel, using wiretaps, informants, and undercover operations to infiltrate Baron's circle. The operation was delicate. One wrong move, and they could all be in danger. But Lara's determination drove her forward. She had spent too many years in this line of work to back down now. She would bring Baron down, and she would make sure justice was served. As the operation continued, Lara couldn't help but feel a creeping sense of fear. Baron had already shown that he was willing to kill to protect himself. Would he try to silence her too? Lara didn't know, but she was ready for whatever came next. The stakes had never been higher, and there was no turning back. The final confrontation was approaching, and the truth was about to be unleashed. Lara stood at the edge of the abandoned warehouse, the cold wind biting at her skin. The operation was set, the evidence gathered, and the time had come to confront Baron. He had no more places to hide, and Lara wasn't going to let him slip away. The police had surrounded the building, waiting for her signal. As she stared at the looming structure, her mind raced through everything that had led to this moment: the lies, the betrayals, and the countless hours spent chasing shadows. Baron was dangerous, but Lara knew his time was up. The weight of Charlotte's death still hung heavily on her, but now there was justice within reach. Lara gave a firm nod to the team and stepped forward. The final showdown was inevitable. There would be no turning back. Baron had played his hand, but Lara was ready to expose him for everything he was: corrupt, manipulative, and guilty. As Lara entered the warehouse, her heart pounded with anticipation. Baron's men were positioned throughout the space, their eyes scanning the shadows. The moment Baron saw her, a cold smile appeared on his face, as if he had been waiting for this confrontation. "You're too late, detective," he said, his voice calm yet laced with arrogance. "You think you've won? You've only just begun to scratch the surface." Lara stood her ground, her eyes never leaving his. "I've uncovered everything, Baron," she said, her voice unwavering. "Your empire is crumbling, and it ends here." Baron chuckled, clearly not threatened. "You have no idea what you're up against," he said, but his confidence was slipping. Lara knew that the power Baron wielded would collapse once the truth was exposed. There was no escape for him now. It was only a matter of time before the law would take its course. As Baron's men moved to surround her, Lara's training kicked in. She was outnumbered, but she wasn't alone. The police, who had infiltrated the building, began to move in from all sides. Baron's confidence faltered as his men were taken down one by one. "This is over, Baron," Lara shouted. He attempted to flee, but a group of officers blocked his escape. His face twisted in fury as he realized his game was up. "You think this is over?" he spat, his eyes wild. "You have no idea what I'm capable of." But Lara wasn't afraid. She took a step forward, her gaze locked on his. "You won't hurt anyone else," she said coldly. "You're done." Doom. Baron's resistance was futile now. His empire was in ruins, and he knew it. With Baron in custody, the weight of the case began to lift from Lara's shoulders. But the victory felt hollow. Justice had been served, but Charlotte was still gone, and the destruction Baron had caused would linger long after the case was closed. Lara walked out of the warehouse, the cold night air biting at her skin. She didn't feel the satisfaction of a job well done, only the emptiness of knowing how much had been lost. She thought of Charlotte, of their friendship, and of all the lies that had led to this moment. As she stood in the silence of the night, Lara couldn't help but wonder what the future would hold now. The war wasn't over, Baron was just one piece of the puzzle. But for now she had won. And that was enough. At least for tonight. Days later, Lara stood at the gravesite, Charlotte's headstone before her. The wind swept through the trees, rustling the leaves, and for a moment everything felt still. Lara placed a single white rose on the grave, her heart heavy with sorrow. Charlotte's death had been the catalyst for exposing Baron, but it hadn't brought her back. The pain of losing her friend would never fade. "I did it for you," Lara whispered, her voice breaking. "I'll make sure no one forgets." As she stood there, the weight of the case lifted from her shoulders. It was over. Baron was behind bars, but the true victory wasn't in his capture. It was in the justice for Charlotte, and for the countless others Baron had hurt. Lara knew she would never forget her friend, and she would carry her memory with her always. Days after Baron's arrest, Lara sat in her office, staring at the file that had been the center of everything. The case was closed, Baron behind bars, but the peace she'd expected never came. There was still a gnawing feeling, as if something had been left undone. Charlotte's death had brought the truth to light, but it didn't fill the empty space left by her loss. The weight of betrayal and death still lingered. The city outside was bustling, indifferent to the lives it changed. As Lara reflected on her friend, her emotions were a storm of sorrow and relief. She had found justice, but she couldn't bring Charlotte back. As she looked at the case files one last time, she realized that justice wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a much harder journey. "What now?" Lara whispered to herself, unsure of what the future held. She had faced darkness and won, but the battle for peace in her own heart had only just begun. Lara met with Tom Ward at a quiet cafe, their meeting unspoken but understood. The case had been resolved, but the weight of the journey pressed down on both of them. "You did good, Lara," Tom said, his voice steady. "But don't let it consume you." Lara nodded, but knew he was right. She had dedicated herself to the case, but the toll it took was evident. "I couldn't stop," she replied. "Not after everything." They talked for a while longer, but words could only do so much. Lara had chased justice, but it came with a price. She had to learn to let go, to find balance in a world that was too often defined by chaos and loss. As they parted ways, Lara's thoughts lingered on Charlotte's memory. This victory, like the case, wasn't as simple as right or wrong. It was complicated, messy, and full of human emotion. Back at her apartment, Lara unpacked her belongings, taking down the case files and setting them aside. The apartment felt oddly empty now that the case was over. She ran her fingers over the photos of Charlotte, memories flashing back. The laughter, the moments of support, the promise of friendship that now felt like a ghost. The weight of Charlotte's absence felt heavier than any case she had worked on. As Lara sat in the quiet of her apartment, the finality of the case made her realize that she had given more of herself to it than she had realized. She closed her eyes, trying to find peace. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the emotional toll it had taken. It was over, but Lara still carried the burden. The morning sun pierced through the blinds as Lara walked into her office, the routine of work slowly returning. The case was closed, but the echo of it lingered. As she sat down at her desk, she couldn't help but think of the people she had lost. Charlotte, her own innocence, and the trust she had placed in others. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in a long time. "Hey," she said when the voice on the other end answered. "I need a drink." It was a simple invitation, but one that held weight. Sometimes, it was the small moments that helped heal the most. There was still so much to process, but for now, she would take a step forward. It wasn't closure, but it was a start. Lara sat on the edge of the rooftop, looking out at the city that had been her battleground for so long. It was still dark, the lights of the city flickering below. She thought of everything that had led to this point, the corruption, the betrayal, the justice. The city was alive with its own stories, its own battles, and for once, Lara felt like just a small part of it. "I did everything I could," she whispered to the wind. The night around her was quiet, but in her heart, the war was still raging. But for now, she was content with the silence. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, but for tonight, she could breathe. Lara stands in a crowded city square, reflecting on the case's conclusion. Baron is imprisoned, but the emotional toll of the investigation remains. "Maybe peace isn't something you can chase," she whispers to herself. In her apartment, Lara reviews the case files, realizing that while justice was served, the personal cost is heavy. "It never really ends," she murmurs, accepting that peace will be elusive. Over coffee with Tom, Lara reflects on the toll the case took. Tom reminds her that justice doesn't come cheap, and though changed, she is still here. Lara is unsure but knows the fight must continue. At Charlotte's grave, Lara whispers a final promise, expressing her guilt and sorrow. She feels Charlotte's memory with her, knowing she'll never truly leave. Walking away from the cemetery, Lara feels a sense of finality. The case is solved, but she knows the journey isn't over. The future is mine to shape, she resolves, ready for what's next.